A young widow, left with nothing but memories, inherits a dilapidated farmhouse for $5. What she discovered hidden beneath its decaying stairs was not just wealth, but a legacy that would force her to fight for the meaning of home. If you've ever had to start over from nothing, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and stick with me, because sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most broken places. The day I ceased to be a number was my 21st birthday. For 2 years, I had been inmate number 734 at the city's transitional housing program, a sterile, beige facility more commonly known as the Northwood Women's Shelter. 2 years of timed showers, fluorescent lights that hummed with a sound like dying insects, and the constant, low-grade thrum of other people's sorrow. 2 years since Liam's car had met a patch of black ice on a bridge, taking with it our future, our savings, and my entire world. The debt he left behind, a mountain of medical bills and a failed business loan I hadn't even known about, had swallowed our small apartment and everything in it. I walked into Northwood with a single duffel bag and a hollowness that felt colder than any winter. Now, I was walking out with the same bag, the same hollowness, and the added burden of legal adulthood. I was officially aged out, a fledgling pushed from a concrete nest. The social worker, a tired woman named Brenda with kind eyes and a perpetually strained smile, handed me my final paperwork and a thin, cream-colored envelope. "This came for you this morning," she said. "By courier, looks official." My name, Clara Vance, was typed neatly on the front, next to the shelter's address. There was no return address, only the embossed seal of a law firm, Abernathy, Cole, and Finch. My heart gave a familiar, sickening lurch. Law firms meant debt collectors. It meant another ghost from Liam's financial past had tracked me down. I almost told her to throw it away. I didn't want to start my first day of freedom with another final notice. But Brenda's expectant look held me in place. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. The paper inside was thick, expensive. It smelled faintly of leather and old books. The letter was brief, its language dense and formal. It requested my presence at their downtown office to discuss the final testament of one Elara Vance. The name snagged in my memory. Liam's grandmother, a woman I had never met, whom he had only spoken of in hushed, complicated tones. A family rift, years before I'd met him, had severed them completely. He'd believed she was dead. Apparently, he was wrong. The letter stated she had passed away 2 months prior, and I was named as a beneficiary in her will. A beneficiary. The word felt alien. The only thing I had been a beneficiary of lately was state-funded compassion. The final sentence was the one that made no sense. It mentioned the primary bequeathment was a property, and that in order to execute the transfer of the deed, a processing fee of $5 was required, payable by me. $5. For a property. It had to be a mistake. Or a cruel joke. Maybe it was a bill for $5,000, and my grief-addled brain had skipped over the zeros. I read it again. And again. $5. I had exactly $12 in my pocket, a parting gift from one of the other women at the shelter. Enough for a bus pass and maybe a hot meal. Or enough to pay a $5 fee for a phantom inheritance. Brenda peered at the letter over my shoulder. "Well, I'll be," she murmured, her professional weariness momentarily replaced by genuine surprise. "What are you going to do?" I looked from the letter to my duffel bag, then out the reinforced window to the gray, indifferent city. I had no plan, no destination. My only option was to return to the network of overnight shelters, a far more dangerous and uncertain world than Northwood. This letter, this bizarre, nonsensical letter, was the first thing in 2 years that wasn't a closed door. It was a question mark. It was a direction. Even if it led to a dead end, it was a path to walk. "I guess I'm going to a lawyer's office," I said, the words feeling strange and foreign in my mouth. I had a destination. For the first time in a long time, I had somewhere to be. The offices of Abernathy, Cole, and Finch were on the 40th floor of a glass and steel tower that scraped the clouds. The elevator ride alone cost more than all my worldly possessions. It was a silent, swift ascent that made my ears pop and my stomach feel like it was still on the ground floor. The lobby was a hushed cathedral of marble, dark wood, and the subtle scent of money. A receptionist with a headset and an unnervingly perfect smile directed me to a corner office with a sweeping view of the city I had just been evicted from. From up here, the grit and noise were gone, replaced by a silent, glittering geometry. It looked peaceful. It was a lie. Mr. Abernathy was an older man, dressed in a suit that was probably worth more than the car Liam and I once shared. He had a gentle, almost weary face, with pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than you were comfortable with. He didn't look like a predator, but I had learned that looks meant very little. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. My condolences on your husband's passing. And I understand on Ilara's as well." I just nodded, my throat tight. I didn't know how to offer condolences for a woman I'd never met, a woman whose existence was a surprise. He seemed to understand my silence. He folded his hands on the massive mahogany desk between us. "Ilara's will is unconventional. She was a very particular woman." He slid a sheaf of documents across the desk. "This is a copy of the relevant section. As you read in my letter, she has left you her primary residence and the land it sits on. The property is located in Stillwater Creek, about 150 miles north of here." He paused, letting that sink in. 150 miles. It might as well have been the moon. "As stipulated, the transfer requires a token payment from you to her estate. A formality, but a legally binding one. $5. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. The but. The part where he would explain the property came with $1 million tax lien or that it was the site of a toxic waste dump. "What's wrong with it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My shelter-honed skepticism was a shield I couldn't lower. Mr. Abernathy gave a small, dry smile. "That is the operative question, isn't it? Legally? Nothing. The title is clean. The taxes are paid up to the end of the year. There are no liens or encumbrances on the deed." He leaned forward slightly. "Practically? I couldn't say. I have never seen the property myself. Ilara was private. By all accounts, the farmhouse is quite old and has been unoccupied for some time. It may be in a state of significant disrepair." Disrepair. I could handle disrepair. I was in a state of significant disrepair myself. "Why me?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd read the letter. She didn't know me. She hadn't seen Liam in over a decade. "Mr. Abernathy's gaze softened. "Her will does not specify her motives, Ms. Vance. Only her instructions. She was very clear. The property was to be offered to you, and only you. If you declined, or were unable to pay the fee," he gestured to a line in the document, "the property was to be immediately transferred to the possession of the state's land trust, with the explicit instruction that it be left to return to nature." So this was it. An all-or-nothing offer from a ghost. "There is one other item," he said, pulling a different folder from a drawer. "There is a standing offer to purchase the property from a corporation called Viridian Development. It is a significant offer. Far more than the land is likely worth, in my opinion." Ilara had apparently been refusing it for years. "As the new owner, that offer would extend to you. You could, theoretically, accept this inheritance and sell the property in the same day. It would be a life-changing amount of money." He named a figure. It was an astronomical number. A number that didn't feel real. It was the kind of money that solved every problem I had, and problems I didn't even know I had yet. It was an escape, a clean slate, a ticket to anywhere. But it felt wrong. It felt too easy. A test. The $5 fee was a test, and this felt like the second question. I thought of Liam, of the fierce, sad love he had for the grandmother he'd lost. He'd said she was stubborn, that she held on to things. She wouldn't have held on to a piece of land for decades just for me to sell it to the first bidder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the worn $5 bill. I smoothed it on the polished desk. The silence in the room was absolute. "I'll take the house," I said. Mr. Abernathy looked at the money, then at me. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, crossed his face. He nodded slowly, took the bill, and placed it in an envelope. "Very well, Ms. Vance. Let's get the paperwork signed. The house is yours." The bus ride was a slow, rattling journey out of the life I knew. I sat with my face pressed against the cold glass, my duffel bag on the seat beside me, the keys to a house I'd never seen heavy in my coat pocket. The city skyline, a familiar silhouette of ambition and failure, slowly sank behind a horizon of concrete and smog. For 2 years, that skyline had been the wall of my prison. Now, watching it disappear felt less like freedom and more like being set adrift in a vast, gray ocean. The bus groaned through an endless sprawl of suburbs, then strip malls, and finally, the landscape began to breathe. The tight grid of streets gave way to winding roads. Buildings were replaced by trees, their bare branches clawing at the November sky. The world turned from gray to brown, the color of dormant fields and fallow earth. I was the only person on the bus for the last 50 miles. The driver, a man with a weathered face and a kind of permanent disinterest, occasionally glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of pity and curiosity. When he finally pulled over at a lonely crossroads marked only by a rusted stop sign and a single, flickering street lamp, he looked at me with open concern. "This is it, miss. Stillwater Creek turnoff." I looked out the window. There was nothing. No town, no station, just 2 roads intersecting in a vast, empty landscape under a bruised-looking sky. A light, wet snow had begun to fall, melting as it hit the asphalt. "The town's about 4 miles down that road," he said, pointing down a narrow lane that vanished into the gloom. "You sure you got someone picking you up?" "I'm fine," I lied, my voice sounding thin. "I like to walk." He grunted, a sound of disbelief, but opened the door. The moment I stepped off the bus, the cold hit me like a physical blow. It was a different kind of cold than the city's damp chill. This was a clean, sharp cold that smelled of wet dirt, pine, and decaying leaves. It felt ancient. The bus pulled away with a hiss of air brakes, its red taillights shrinking into the twilight until they were gone, leaving me in a profound and unnerving silence. The only sound was the wind whispering through the skeletal trees and the soft, rhythmic patter of the sleet on my coat. I stood there for a long moment, a tiny, insignificant figure in the middle of nowhere. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my resolve. This was a mistake. I should have taken the money. I could be in a warm hotel room right now, ordering room service, planning a new life. What was I doing here, chasing the whim of a dead woman I'd never met? But then I felt the key in my pocket. It was old, iron, and heavy. It was real. It was a promise. I pulled the hood of my coat up, adjusted the strap of my duffel bag on my shoulder, and started walking. The road was unpaved, a ribbon of dark, packed dirt that was quickly turning to mud. My thin-soled city boots were no match for it. With every step, a cold dampness seeped into my socks. The 4 miles felt like 10. The light faded fast, the world dissolving into shades of gray and black. The snow began to stick, dusting the fields and trees in a thin layer of white, creating a ghostly, beautiful, and utterly desolate scene. I thought about Liam. He had grown up in a place like this before his father moved them to the city. He used to talk about the quiet, the stars. He said you could hear the world breathing out here. Right now, all I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. Set back from the road, at the end of a long, overgrown lane, was a dark silhouette against the darkening sky. A house. It was larger than I expected. a classic two-story farmhouse with a steeply pitched roof and a wide wraparound porch. And it was a wreck. Even in the gloom, I could see the sag in the porch roof, the dark, gaping holes where windows should be, boarded up like blind eyes. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood bare and silvered by the elements. It didn't look abandoned. It looked like it had given up. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. This wasn't a house. It was a ruin. Mr. Abernathy's words echoed in my head. A state of significant disrepair. That was the understatement of the century. This was a teardown. The developer's offer wasn't generous. It was for the land. The house was worthless. And it was mine. My hands were numb with cold as I fumbled with the key. It was an old, heavy skeleton key, the kind you see in movies. The lock was a large iron box affair, rusted and stiff. For a terrifying moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. I imagined myself freezing to death on the porch of my own useless house. The absurdity of it was almost funny. I put my shoulder into the door, turned the key with all my might, and with a deafening groan of protest, the lock gave way. The door swung inward into a cavern of absolute blackness. The smell that rolled out was thick and ancient. It was the smell of dust, of trapped air, of mice and decay and time itself. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for a very long time. I stepped inside, my foot landing on the gritty floor with a crunch. I slid my duffel bag off my shoulder and left the door open a crack, letting a sliver of weak gray light penetrate the gloom. My eyes slowly adjusted. I was in a large central hallway. A grand staircase, its banister thick with dust, swept up into the darkness of the second floor. To my left and right were doorways leading to other rooms, their contents shrouded in white sheets like a congregation of ghosts. Everything was still, utterly, unnervingly still. I ran a hand along the wall. The wallpaper was peeling in long, brittle strips. Beneath it, the plaster was cracked. I walked into the room on the left. A living room, I guessed. The shrouded shapes of a sofa and armchairs sat silently. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its maw black with old soot. I touched the edge of one of the sheets, hesitated, then pulled it back. A cloud of dust billowed up, making me cough. Underneath was a floral-patterned sofa, faded but intact. It was like uncovering a relic in a tomb. I moved through the house like a ghost myself, my footsteps echoing in the vast silence. The dining room, with a long, sheeted table. The kitchen, with its primitive-looking iron stove and a hand pump by the sink. There was no electricity, no running water. It was more than old. It was a time capsule. The cold inside was even more profound than it was outside. It was a damp, penetrating cold that settled deep in your bones. I could see my breath, a small, fleeting cloud in the darkness. I wrapped my arms around myself, a small, shivering figure in this enormous, dead house. What was I supposed to do? Where would I even start? The task of making this place habitable was so monumental, I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. My gaze kept returning to the staircase in the main hall. It was the heart of the house, the central artery. It felt important. I walked back out and stood at its base, looking up into the oppressive darkness of the second floor. Alara Vance. What had she been thinking? Was this a gift or a punishment? A test of strength or a cruel joke played on a desperate girl? I ran my hand along the newel post, a thick, carved piece of oak. My fingers came away black with grime. I looked down. My boots had left clean prints in the thick layer of dust on the floor. No one had walked here for years, decades, maybe. And then I saw it. Just to the side of the bottom step, a single floorboard that wasn't quite flush with the others. Its edge was raised by no more than a fraction of an inch, but in the uniform decay, It was a glaring imperfection. It looked disturbed. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was probably nothing, a warped board, a loose nail, but a flicker of instinct, a whisper of Liam's grandmother's stubbornness, told me to look closer. I knelt down, the cold of the floor seeping through my jeans. I tried to pry at the edge with my numb fingers, but it wouldn't budge. I needed a tool. My eyes scanned the cavernous living room, the fireplace, of course. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from its stand. It was cold and solid in my hand. Back at the staircase, I wedged the tip of the poker into the tiny gap and levered it. The old wood groaned in protest, but it began to lift. I worked the poker along the edge, and with a final, splintering crack, the board came free. I pulled it up and set it aside. Beneath it was a dark, shallow cavity in the subfloor, and nestled inside that cavity was a small, rectangular object. A metal box, rusted and black, about the size of a shoebox. It wasn't a fortune, it wasn't a treasure, but it was something. It was a secret, and it was meant for me. I carried the box into the kitchen, the room that felt the most practical, the most grounded in reality. I set it on the dusty countertop, its rusted bottom leaving a red-brown stain. It was locked with a simple clasp, but years of corrosion had fused it shut. There was no key. For a moment, I just stared at it, this strange inheritance from a woman of secrets. The fireplace poker was still in my hand. It felt like the right tool for the job. I wedged its tip under the lip of the lid and pushed. Nothing. I repositioned it and threw my weight into it. Metal scraped against rusted metal. With a final, jarring shriek of protest, the clasp broke and the lid popped open. My breath hitched. Inside, there was no gold, no jewels. There was only a single object, resting on a bed of what looked like dried lavender. It was an envelope, thick and made of heavy parchment, its flap sealed with a dollop of dark red wax stamped with an intricate V. It was addressed in elegant, spidery handwriting. To Clara, not Ms. Vance, Clara. My fingers trembled as I lifted it out. The seal was brittle, it cracked under the pressure of my thumb, and the scent of lavender and old paper rose up to meet me. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting inside was the same as on the envelope, precise, strong, and unapologetically feminine. It was a voice captured in ink. Clara, it began. If you are reading this, it means you had the sense to come, the patience to find this, and you paid the $5. Good. The fee was not for the house. It was to see if you had $5 worth of faith. It seems you do. I had to sit down. I slid onto a rickety wooden chair, my eyes glued to the page. You must have many questions. I will answer what I can, but I will not waste ink on sentiment. I did not know you. I knew of you. I watched from a distance as you made my grandson happy. When he died, I watched as the world tried to break you. It did not succeed. You bent, but you did not break. That is a rare and valuable quality. This house is a wreck. I know that. I have not set foot in it for 10 years. I left it to you not as a shelter, but as a choice. A crossroads. In the kitchen, inside the blue tea canister on the shelf above the stove, you will find $500. It is enough for a bus ticket back to the city and a few weeks in a rented room. It is enough to wash your hands of this place, of me, of this whole tangled mess. No one would blame you if you took it. It is the sensible path. The easy path. I glanced up at the shelf. There it was. A small blue tin canister, covered in dust. The easy path. But there is another path, the letter continued. This house, this land, is more than it seems. It is a legacy, and it is under attack. A company called Viridian Development wants this land. They want it more than anything. For 15 years, I have kept them at bay. They are patient. They are ruthless. They are vultures in expensive suits. They will have already made you an offer, a generous one. Do not be fooled. Their generosity is a weapon. They believe I was just a stubborn old woman rattling around a dying farm. They are wrong. I was a guardian. And now, that responsibility falls to you if you choose to accept it. It is a heavy burden. It will not make you happy, not at first. It will require more strength than you think you have. But you do have it. Liam knew it. I know it. So, here is your choice, Clara. Take the money from the tea tin and walk away. Or leave it there, as a sign that you accept. If you accept, your real inheritance awaits. The tools you will need for the fight ahead are here, in this house. But you will have to work for them. You will have to prove you are worthy of them. The heart of this house isn't in the hearth. It's under the stairs. Start there. The rest will follow. Ilara Vance. I read the letter 3 times. My mind was reeling. A choice. A test. A fight. This was so much more than a dilapidated house. It was a gauntlet thrown down by a dead woman. I looked at the blue tea tin, then back at the letter. $500. It was a fortune to me. It was safety. It was a warm meal and a bed that wasn't in a room with 20 other people. It was an escape from this crushing cold and the overwhelming task before me. The sensible path. The easy path. But Liam's face swam in my memory. The way he'd talk about his grandmother, a mix of awe and frustration. She never backed down from a fight, he'd said once, shaking his head. Not for anyone. And her words in the letter. You bent, but you did not break. She saw something in me, something I hadn't seen in myself for a very long time. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked back into the main hall. I stood before the staircase, a silent, looming giant in the gloom. The heart of this house. I placed my hand on the dusty wood. It felt like I was making a silent promise. I would not take the easy path. I would fight. The decision was made, but the reality of it crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. The letter, for all its cryptic strength, had not magically heated the house or fixed the windows. The profound, bone-deep cold remained. The sun had fully set, and the darkness outside was now absolute, a thick, starless blanket of black. The sliver of light from the open door was gone. I was alone, in the dark, in a crumbling house 150 miles from anyone who knew my name. The weight of Ilara's challenge, of the fight she mentioned, felt less like an honor and more like an anchor, pulling me down into a sea of impossibility. I fumbled in my bag for the small, cheap flashlight I'd been issued at the shelter. Its beam was weak, a pathetic little circle of light against the oppressive dark. But it was something. I went back to the kitchen and, on autopilot, opened the blue tea canister. The $500 were there, crisp bills neatly bundled with a rubber band. The easy way out. I could be on a bus back to the city by morning. Back to a world I understood, even if it was a harsh one. The temptation was a physical ache. I sank to the filthy kitchen floor, leaning my back against the cold cupboards, and I let the despair I had been holding at bay for 2 years finally wash over me. I cried. I cried for Liam, for the warmth of his hand in mine, for the easy laughter we used to share. I cried for the life we were supposed to build together, a life of noisy kids and a small garden and growing old. I cried for the person I used to be, the girl who believed in happy endings. And I cried for the woman I was now, this hollowed-out, lonely creature sitting in the dark, clutching a flashlight and a dead woman's letter. The sobs were ragged and ugly, torn from a place of deep, silent grief. I was so tired. Tired of being strong, tired of surviving, tired of starting over. Maybe Ilara was wrong. Maybe I was broken after all. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the tears subsided, leaving behind a raw, empty ache. The flashlight beam flickered, a reminder that even my light was temporary. In the quiet, a memory surfaced. It was from a few months after Liam and I started dating. My own parents had died years before, and I was telling him about the aftermath, about feeling adrift and lost. He had listened patiently, and when I was done, he'd taken my hand. "Your strength is quiet, Clara," he'd said, his voice soft but sure. "It's not the loud, flashy kind. It's like bedrock. People don't see it, but it's what everything else is built on. It's the strongest thing about you." At the time, I'd dismissed it as the sweet talk of a new boyfriend. But now, sitting in the cold and the dark, the words came back to me as a lifeline. Bedrock. Something that endures. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air was frigid, but it felt clean, clarifying. I could give up. I could take the money and run. Or I could be the person Liam believed I was. The person Ilara was betting her legacy on. I pushed myself to my feet, my joints stiff and protesting. I closed the lid on the blue tea canister, leaving the money untouched. It was a small, silent act, but it felt momentous. It was an answer, an acceptance. I picked up the fireplace poker. It felt heavier now, more like a tool and less like a weapon. My resolve was thin, fragile, but it was there, a tiny flame in the overwhelming dark. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that, where the easy way out was calling to you, a siren song of comfort and release, but something deep inside, a voice you barely recognized as your own, told you to choose the harder path? Let me know in the comments, because I think we've all been there. It's in those moments of impossible choice, when we're stripped down to nothing, that we find out who we really are. Sometimes, the only way forward is through the fire. I went back to the main hall, the weak beam of my flashlight dancing across the dust-shrouded surfaces. "The heart of this house isn't in the hearth," Ilara had written. "It's under the stairs." The space beneath the main staircase was closed off by a small, simple wooden door, its paint cracked and peeling. It probably led to a storage closet. I pulled on the simple latch, and it opened with a low groan. A wave of even colder, mustier air washed over me. I shone my light inside. It was exactly what I expected. A small, cramped, triangular space packed with the detritus of a long life. There were stacks of old newspapers tied with string, a collection of dusty canning jars, a broken chair, and a child's rocking horse, its paint faded and one of its rockers split. It was a tomb of forgotten things. There was no treasure chest, no secret panel immediately visible. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, pricked at me. Had I misunderstood? Was this another, more metaphorical test? But Ilara's words had been direct. Start there. I squeezed into the cramped space, coughing as the disturbed dust filled the air. I started moving things. The newspapers were brittle, dated from the 1980s. The jars were empty. The rocking horse stared at me with one painted-on eye, a silent, creepy observer. I cleared a small space on the floor and examined it with my light. It was made of the same wide oak planks as the rest of the house. I tapped on them. They were solid. I ran my hands over them, feeling for a loose board, a hidden latch, anything. Nothing. I was about to give up, to believe I'd made a terrible mistake, when my light caught something on the back wall, behind where the rocking horse had been. It wasn't a mark, it was a diagram. Scratched faintly into the plaster were the outlines of the floorboards, and two of them were marked with a small, crude X. I scrambled back to the spot and focused my light. The two boards looked identical to the others, but if Ilara had marked them, there had to be a reason. I retrieved the crowbar I'd seen earlier in the back of the house, a heavy piece of rusted steel I found in a lean-to shed that was barely standing. Back in the closet, there was barely room to maneuver. I jammed the forked end of the crowbar into the seam beside the first marked board and put all my weight on it. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the small space. It was brutally hard work. The boards were thick, held down by long, hand-forged nails. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold. My muscles, unused to such labor, screamed in protest. But with each groan of the wood, with each millimeter the board lifted, a fierce, primal energy surged through me. I was not just prying up a floor, I was fighting back against the despair that had held me captive. Finally, with a loud crack, the first board came loose. I tossed it aside and immediately started on the second. It was just as stubborn. But I was relentless. I worked with a kind of desperate fury, grunting with the effort, my knuckles raw and bleeding where I'd scraped them against the other planks. At last, the second board gave way. I pulled it free and shone my flashlight into the opening I had created. Beneath the floorboards was not a shallow cavity, but a deep, dark space. And sitting in the center of that space, solid and immense, was a large black footlocker, bound with steel straps. It was huge, at least 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. It looked like something a pirate would bury. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Getting it out was another battle. It was incredibly heavy, far heavier than it should have been. I had to loop my arms through the handles and drag it, inch by painful inch, out of the closet and into the main hall. My back screamed, but I didn't care. I finally got it into the center of the hall, where it sat like a dark altar in the beam of my flashlight. The front was fitted with a heavy, formidable-looking padlock. It seemed impossible. But then I remembered. I fumbled in my coat pocket and pulled out the small, rusted box that had held the first letter. I'd shoved it in my pocket without thinking. Tucked into the dried lavender at the bottom, almost invisible, was a small, ornate iron key. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely fit it into the keyhole. It slid in perfectly. With a satisfying, deep-throated clunk, the lock sprang open. I took a deep breath, and I lifted the heavy lid. The flashlight beam fell inside, and I gasped. The top layer was cash. Stacks and stacks of it, bundled in paper bands from a bank. Not hundreds of dollars. Thousands. Tens of thousands. It was a breathtaking, unbelievable amount of money. My mind couldn't even process the number. But as I stared, I realized the money was just the beginning. It was just the top layer. Carefully, I lifted out one of the stacks. Beneath the cash, the footlocker was filled with documents. There were thick, formal-looking papers tied with ribbon. I lifted one. It was the original deed to the property, signed in 1919. Not just for the house, but for 200 acres of surrounding land. There were geological surveys, water rights contracts, and agricultural reports. And at the very bottom, taking up half the chest, was a thick, black, 3-ring binder. On its spine, in neat, white letters, was a single word: Viridian. Alara hadn't just left me a house and some money. She had left me an arsenal. The dawn came slowly, a reluctant seeping of gray light into the blackness. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night sitting on the floor beside the open footlocker, the beam of my flashlight growing steadily weaker as I sifted through its contents. The sheer scale of what Alara had assembled was staggering. The money was one thing, a life raft, a tool, but the documents were the real treasure. They were a history, a defense, a declaration of war. Exhausted but wired, I watched the world outside the grimy windows slowly take shape. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white blanket over everything, muffling the world in a beautiful, profound silence. It made the old farmhouse look less like a ruin and more like a survivor, weathered and proud. It was in the middle of this quiet morning that I heard it, the low, unfamiliar crunch of tires on the snow-covered lane. My entire body went rigid. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mr. Abernathy didn't know the details yet. No one knew I was here. I scrambled to close the footlocker, my heart hammering against my ribs. I managed to drag it back toward the shadows of the staircase just as a vehicle came into view. It wasn't a rusty pickup truck or a sensible sedan. It was a sleek, black SUV, the kind that looks like it belongs in a motorcade. It purred to a stop in front of the house, its tinted windows hiding its occupants. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored overcoat, his shoes polished to a mirror shine despite the snow. He moved with an easy, predatory grace, his eyes scanning the dilapidated farmhouse with an expression of detached appraisal. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, and he was utterly, unnervingly out of place. He walked up the rickety porch steps, avoiding a hole in the floorboards without even seeming to look at it, and knocked on the door. The sound was loud and authoritative. I stayed frozen in the hall, hidden in the shadows, my mind racing. This had to be them. Viridian. He knocked again, harder this time. "Hello? Is anyone here? My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm here to speak with the owner of the property." His voice was smooth, cultured, and carried an unmistakable edge of impatience. I had a choice. I could stay silent, pretend no one was home, or I could face him. Ilara's words echoed in my head. "They are vultures in expensive suits." I thought of the binder labeled Viridian, of the 15 years she had held them off. Hiding was not an option, not anymore. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. Mr. Sterling's perfectly composed face registered a flicker of surprise. He was clearly not expecting a young woman in a dirty coat with grime on her face. He recovered quickly, his lips curving into a practiced, charming smile. "Good morning," he said. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm with Viridian Development. We had an arrangement to purchase this property from the late Ms. Vance, and we were informed the estate had recently been settled." It was a lie, a casual, easy lie. Mr. Abernathy had said it was an offer, not an arrangement. "I'm the new owner," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Clara Vance." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Vance, a pleasure. I'm here to finalize our offer. We understand the property is in a certain condition. We are prepared to offer you $750,000 for the house and the full 200 acres. Cash settlement, we handle all closing costs and legal fees. You could be on a plane to somewhere warm by the end of the week." The number hung in the cold air between us. It was an obscene amount of money. It was more than the offer Mr. Abernathy had mentioned. They were escalating. They thought I was young, alone, and desperate. They thought I could be bought. I looked at his polished shoes, his expensive coat, and then back at his cold, expectant eyes. I thought of Ilara's letter, of the bedrock strength Liam said I had. I felt a strange calm settle over me. "The property is not for sale," I said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the weight of a dropped stone. Sterling's smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. "Ms. Vance, perhaps you don't understand. This house is a liability. The cost of repairs, the property taxes, the isolation. We are offering you a clean break. A new life." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "My answer is no." For the first time, a flash of genuine annoyance crossed his face. He looked past me, into the dark, cold hall of the house, as if he couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose this ruin over his mountain of cash. "The offer stands," he said, his voice losing its silken edge. "For now. Think it over." He pulled a slim, metallic business card from his coat and held it out. I didn't take it. He placed it on the porch railing, a glint of silver against the weathered wood. "Don't be sentimental, Ms. Vance. It's a bad investment." He turned and walked back to his SUV without another word. As the vehicle disappeared down the lane, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My legs felt like jelly, but I hadn't buckled. I had stood my ground. As soon as he was gone, I used my cheap cell phone, which miraculously had a single bar of service, and called Mr. Abernathy. I told him everything. The footlocker, the cash, the documents, The visit from Sterling. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Good God, Miss Vance," he finally breathed. "Don't touch that money. Don't move those documents. I'll figure out the next steps. It seems your grandmother-in-law was more formidable than anyone knew, and it seems you are too." After the call, a new energy surged through me. It was the energy of defiance. I wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. I was a participant. I found a local directory in one of the drawers, and using the emergency cash from the tea tin, because this was an emergency, I called the number for a handyman. A gruff voice answered, "George's Repairs." I explained that my generator wasn't working, and I had a few leaks in my roof. "The old Vance place?" he grunted. "Thought that place was condemned." "It's not," I said, "and I'm paying cash." There was a pause. "Be there in an hour." It was a start. I was done being cold. I was done being in the dark. I was taking back control, one broken piece at a time. George the handyman arrived in a battered pickup truck that seemed to be held together by rust and willpower. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face like a topographical map of a hard life and hands that looked like they could fix anything. He surveyed the house with a critical eye, grunted, and went straight to work on the generator in the shed. He didn't ask questions. He just worked. An hour later, a low, steady hum filled the air, and for the first time, I flipped a switch in the kitchen, and a single bare bulb flickered to life. The light was weak, yellow, and coated in decades of dust, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Light. And with the light came the possibility of heat. George managed to get an old electric space heater working, and we huddled around it in the living room, the small pool of warmth a defiant island in the sea of cold. With the immediate threats of darkness and freezing receded, I felt ready. I retrieved the black binder from the footlocker. Viridian. I sat in one of the dusty armchairs, the space heater humming at my feet, and I opened it. It was not just a collection of papers. It was a life's work. Ilara had been a meticulous, obsessive archivist of her own war. The first section contained every piece of correspondence between her and Viridian, starting 15 years ago. Their letters began as polite inquiries, then escalated to increasingly generous offers, then to thinly veiled threats about zoning changes and eminent domain. Her replies were masterpieces of polite, unyielding refusal. But it was the next section that made my blood run cold. Ilara had somehow obtained internal company documents, memos, emails, strategic plans. I didn't know how, an informant, a leak, but they were here. They detailed Viridian's strategy for the entire region, which they'd codenamed Project Stillwater. Their plan was to acquire all the contiguous farmland, not for housing, but for a massive water extraction and bottling plant. The geological surveys in the footlocker suddenly made sense. This land sat on top of a massive, pristine aquifer. Viridian didn't want the land. They wanted the water underneath it. The memos also laid out their tactics: target elderly and financially distressed landowners, use legal intimidation, and bury them in court costs until they were forced to sell. They had a name for people like Ilara: holdouts. There were even documents hinting at a cover-up of a minor chemical spill on a neighboring property they had already acquired, a spill that could threaten the very aquifer they sought to control. This wasn't just a corporate land grab. It was a conspiracy. Tucked into a sleeve in the very back of the binder was one last envelope, this one unsealed. It contained another letter, several pages long, in Ilara's familiar, sharp script. This one was different. The formal armor was gone. This was the heart of the story. "Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, you have faced them. And you are still here. I knew you would be. I owe you an explanation. Not for the house or the money, but for Liam, for the silence. My son, Liam's father, was a good man, but a weak one. He saw the world in shades of gray, in compromises. When Viridian first came to this valley, he saw them as an opportunity, a sign of progress. He took a job with them, a junior executive position. He wanted me to sell the farm, to move to the city, to be reasonable. He did not understand what this land was. He did not understand that some things are not for sale. We argued. The arguments became a chasm between us. He chose his path, and I chose mine. The silence that followed was a wound that never healed. I lost my son. And because of my pride, my stubbornness, I lost my grandson too. I followed Liam's life from afar. I have pictures of him you've never seen. His high school graduation, the day he opened his first doomed business, the day he met you. I saw the light in his eyes when he was with you. He was a better man than his father. He had my strength and his father's heart, a dangerous combination. After he died, I saw you. I saw you navigate the wreckage. I saw you refuse to be crushed by it. I didn't choose you because you were my grandson's widow. I chose you because I saw in you the same thing I see in this land. Something people underestimate. Something that endures. Something worth fighting for. This house isn't an inheritance, child. It's an outpost. The money isn't for you to be rich. It's ammunition. The documents are the weapons. Don't let them win. Don't let them poison this valley and steal what they have no right to. My fight is over. Yours is just beginning. Forgive an old woman her pride. Forgive me for not knowing the boy. Love the man you remember, and fight for the future he can no longer have. Elara. I closed the binder, tears streaming down my face. They were not tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of understanding, of purpose. The story wasn't about abandonment. It was about a strange, fierce, and complicated love. It was about a legacy of resistance passed from one stubborn woman to another. I looked around the dusty, broken room, illuminated by a single bulb, and for the first time, I felt it. I was home. 6 months can change everything. Spring arrived in Stillwater Creek not as a gentle awakening, but as a riotous explosion of life. The oppressive gray of winter gave way to an almost violent green. The trees that had been skeletal claws against the sky were now lush and full. The air, once sharp with cold, was now thick with the scent of damp earth and blossoming wildflowers. The farmhouse had changed too. It stood not as a ruin, but as a work in progress. The porch no longer sagged. Its foundations had been reinforced by George, its floorboards replaced. The windows were no longer blind eyes. New panes of glass glinted in the sunlight. A small, tilled patch of dirt beside the house held the hopeful green shoots of a vegetable garden. It was still old, still weathered, but it was no longer giving up. It was healing, just like me. I was sitting on the newly repaired porch swing, a mug of coffee warming my hands, talking to Mr. Abernathy on the phone. His voice, once so formal and distant, was now warm and familiar, the voice of a co-conspirator. The State Attorney General's office is launching a full investigation, he said, a note of satisfaction in his tone. The documents from Elara's binder, especially the ones about the chemical spill, were the tipping point. Viridian is lawyering up, but they're on the defensive for the first time in years. We have them, Clara. It will be a long road, but we have them. Good, I said, looking out over the rolling hills of my land. My land. The words still felt new, powerful. Keep me updated. We said our goodbyes and I hung up. The legal battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. Elara's ammunition was working. The money from the footlocker, which Mr. Abernathy had helped me place in a secure trust, was funding the fight. It paid for his retainer, for independent environmental testing, and for the slow, steady restoration of the farmhouse. George the handyman was now a fixture, his truck rattling up the lanes several times a week. He'd taught me how to patch plaster, how to identify different bird calls, and how to make coffee that could strip paint. Through him, I'd met others in the small, scattered community. The woman who ran the feed store, the family that owned the apple orchard down the road. They were wary at first, another outsider in the old Vance place. But they'd seen the black SUV, and they'd seen it leave. They'd seen me stay. Respect, in a place like this, was earned, not given. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was the Vance girl. I was a holdout. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out at the 200 acres that were my responsibility, my purpose. The word rich had been in the back of my mind since that first day. What was hidden under the stairs made her rich. I had thought it meant the money, and in a way, it did. The money had given me options, security. But sitting here, on this porch, with the sun on my face and the sound of birds in the trees, I understood the truth. Rich isn't about the number in your bank account. I learned that when Liam died, when the debt collectors took everything and left me with nothing. Being rich is about having a place to stand your ground. It's about having work that matters. It's about having a future that you are building with your own two hands, not one that is handed to you. Alara didn't give me a fortune. She gave me a fight. She gave me a home, not by handing me a perfect house, but by giving me the tools and the reason to resurrect a broken one. She had given me back the part of myself I thought had died with Liam, the bedrock, the quiet strength, the ability to endure. My story is about finding a home in the ruins of a life I thought was over. It's about redefining what it means to be wealthy. What does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, a memory, a feeling? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe our stories are the most valuable things we own. And if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, a place to stand their ground, and a purpose worth fighting for, please subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, a home for people who understand that the deepest roots often grow in the hardest ground. Thank you for listening.